I'm gonna take my Vegeta, give it 35k, and swing into your leader again and again, and you're gonna like it. Hey everybody, Espira, and we are back with another deck profile, upgrading these starter decks, this time looking at Blue Vegeta. When it comes to Vegeta, it's hard to stray away from the peel-off package, which I really don't want to make every blue deck a peel-off deck. But the amount of value you get specifically when it comes to Vegeta already being a 35k means that you can position yourselves into auto guaranteed damage positions, which are incredibly strong. We've already looked at Trunks before, and what I would say is that Trunks properly opens himself up to being a more flexible deck and straying away from the peel-off package. But when we're facing a leader that can bump up to 35k all by himself, it kind of really incentivizes you to kind of take that to the max, and that's where we're taking this deck build, with a couple of concessions here and there, depending on the meta. To kick it off, of course, we have to look at the leader, and there's not much there, guys. You guys have been playing with and against him during the pre-release events. Front side is a draw leader, back side also a draw leader, but has an activate main once per turn. If you have 7 or less cards in your hand, this card gets 15k power for the turn. My only tip is that the moment you're able to activate his activate main, probably just do it so you don't forget about it. There have been some scenarios where I've sequenced in a way where I was stuck because then I no longer had 7 or fewer cards in hand. So honestly, at the start of the turn, or when you play a card out of your hand before you self-awaken with like a Goten or something or anything of the sort, just use his ability, get your 35k, and go from there. Like I had mentioned, we are in the peel-off package, specifically generally. When I consider the peel-off package, it is peel-off, which is the one drop that's able to get any one drop Earthling card from your drop, and Pan. I think that combination in any blue decks to be able to filter early, find yourself awakenings, or discard away the extra cards that you have in your hand that are clumping it up a little. I love that combination, especially since Pan is a 10k combo, and we run a Final Hope Slash, which in combination with our leader is a 55k swing, which is huge, gets rid of a blocker. And I do love the additional removal where our opponent knows that we're going to try to close out the game with our leader. So we can sequence with a battle card, use Final Hope Slash, get that card off the board, whatever blocker they may have, and now we can kind of go in with our leader and still have a massive attack without committing card. Then finally, I am teching Bulma here. Nothing special, just I wanted additional 10k combos to be able to pull with peel off. And I do like the flexibility that she's a blocker I can get. I don't like the one drop blockers, but if I'm making the read on my opponent that he doesn't have removal and she can help me stay off another turn, having a searchable one drop blocker is much better. No secret that the leader is incredibly strong, self-awakened. So in that sense, we've got the best self-awakeners in the game. We got Mai, which obviously does double duty as not only self-awakener, but a way to be able to generate cards when we're bouncing cards back to our opponent's hand, which is also why we're maxing on Sun Goten. I do like the play of playing Mai, playing Sun Goten onto swing, bounce, whatever they play, draw an additional card, and just keeping that value engine going. And that's tied up with a pair of Trunks Youth to kind of maximize on 10 total self-awakeners, as well as just having a good 25k attacker for 2, which is pretty relevant. Broly is looking to be pretty popular in the meta if people keep on playing with yellow aggro, so having those 25k base numbers is pretty relevant. Very similar theme as to what we're looking at on our 3-drops. We've got the 3-drop Vegeta, 25k base, and again, there are other Vegetas that can put in a lot of good work, and we'll talk about those in cards that you could tech in. I just happen to really like the fact that he's a 25k base, and the fact that he switches back to active mode makes him harder for other decks to deal with, making him a really annoying attacker. Gohan is a 3-drop 35k, which we're playing just to have that strong presence on board. And of course, we've got Piccolo because having that combination of looping Gallic guns is just really strong. Also gives us the option to throw away our other flex extra cards and then get them back as well. It's not as linear as just peel off. We can only get Final Hope Slash. Pivoting over to our win cons, and for what it's worth, win cons is really loose when we're talking about the Vegeta deck because the leader is the win con. You're strategizing around probably closing out with a big 35k swing, but nevertheless, I think having some flexibility in the battle card range is very helpful. So here I do like the 25k crit Trunks here because of course it bounces a body, which means it can clear the way for the blocker, it can clear the way for your leader. And it's a crit attacker, which means it's likely a distraction point for our opponent, which will want to attack into it to deal with it. And then we've got a pair of double striking Vegetas, even if our goal will usually be to primarily finish off our opponents using big singular damage. I think having the flexibility of double strikers in your deck is really important, especially since there's a play pattern in which opponents don't like going down to 1 against Vegeta, because if you do so, then you're facing a 35k that can potentially just end the game at any point in time. So oftentimes players will actually over combo to stay at 2 life to get away from that threat, and then having the double striker in your back pocket to be able to close that in when they get a little bit too frisky that way is a fantastic option. In terms of additional removal, we are looking at 3 sickles. All my decks usually start at least with 2, but because we're starting to see so many yellow decks prop up, and I'm not gonna lie, the yellow matchup is really tough because they're faster than you. Your board control options aren't fantastic. They usually bounce back to hand, and then they can just play the Ginyu stuff again. So it's very tough for blue to be able to mitigate against yellow, and Sinister Sickle is part of the solution in being able to get there, which is why we bumped it up to 3. And honestly, if you're playing against yellow, it's a mandatory keep in your hand. There are other removal options I considered. I forget the one Despair card. I'll pop it up with the editor. But I don't like that one because it bounces back to hand, which is really good against red, but not so good against yellow. And I'm not as concerned about the red matchup as I am about the yellow matchup. So it doesn't work out too well there, but there are some considerations for additional removal if you're concerned about aggro. Of course, there are some very solid cards in the blue card pool, and a number that I did not actually include, but I did consider. The 3-drop Trunks is more of a catch-all than the 4-drop in terms of what it removes, and because our leader is so strong, there is an argument that we should be running this one instead. Because it's cheaper, it bounces back more cards than the 4-drop, but I'm leaning towards kind of going bigger on that front. But if you want to go smaller and open up the way for your leader on a bit more flexibility, I think that makes a lot of sense. When we're looking at Gotenks, there's obviously a lot of strength in being able to get a lot of additional combo power to be able to close out the game, especially when we're talking about a leader who's already a 35k base. If you decide to go down the Gotenks route, I think you sub out the Bulmas, you bring in vanilla Goten so that you just have more targets for your Gotenks, and you go from there, especially since that Goten can also be pulled from peel off. The only reason I'm not really running him is because he felt awkward to play during the beta. There were a lot of opportunities where I just felt like I had to control the board or make other plays that pushed my momentum more than simply drawing 2 cards. It felt awkward, and I'm going to revisit it and I'm going to try it again. But the reason it's on my build right now is just because as much as I love Gotenks as a concept for a card, it just never felt fantastic to play. Outside of like when I'm going for game on an open board state and like he nets me like 20k additional combo. Obviously that's good. We're running a 3-drop Vegeta, but of course you can run the 4-drop Vegeta, which is a 20k that can swing twice, as well as bottom deck with 1-drop, which is good value if your opponent's not playing around it. They do lose that combo power, which is very valuable. But again, the reason I'm going with the 3-drop is because I'm leaning into the 25k bases as opposed to the 20k bases. But the 20k base Vegeta is very strong, and it also helps against board control because it can attack into multiple battle cards. And finally, we're not including Final Flash because I'm kind of playing this deck in the sense of like I'm kind of ignoring what my opponent is doing and applying pressure and hoping that I can get there before they do. But if you're concerned about your opponent's 5-drops, you should probably include a number of them. At the moment, the way that the deck is laid out, we don't have any solutions for 5-drop ramp Goku. And that is a concession I am making, but I own up that that could be very wrong. And if your meta is green heavy, you probably lean into a couple of Final Flashes to be able to deal with the 5-drop. Right now, I'm just saying, I don't care. I ignore it. I'm just going to try and win anyways and outvalue you with my infinite loops. But there's a good chance that just doesn't get there. So when it comes to blue overall, it's kind of a tough strategy to talk about because of the fact that peel off feels so strong and centralizing that you feel bad not playing other engines in the deck. But I do think there's flexibility in the builds that you can play. Not a ton. I do think the weakness here is against lower to the ground aggro decks, especially when you're looking at your 2-drop 15Ks. Granted, Trunks oftentimes can be at 25K instead, but it feels tough because your board control options aren't amazing, especially when you're bouncing stuff back to hand. So while you're costing your opponent tempo, it's like not really, because if it's yellow, they're already playing stuff back on board, which plays more stuff, or you're giving them back combo power so they can kind of use the card anyways. So it puts you in these awkward positions where you're kind of trading off some very current tempo for late game tempo, and you might not get that value back. But regardless, I think the fact that your 35K lead puts in a ton of work, and if we can support that package, then we can actually be a very lethal deck against our opponents. I do think blue decks will look very similar though going into the first set meta. There are a number of cards that centralize the strategies around them that make them feel like there are no other options. Obviously the peel off package and other cards surrounding that. Nevertheless, if you want a linear strategy that has a lot of maneuvering around your hand advantage and can apply some great pressure, I think this is a fantastic deck choice to be able to kick off the Fusion World meta. And if you've got other starter decks that you're looking to upgrade, we got deck profiles on the channel for those. Subscribe down there, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.